98.1 WBFH, Bloomfield Hills. Today's edition of the Megacast begins now. Welcome to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Today we'll be talking to a number of people about topics of interest and importance to Michiganders just like you. Let's begin with what's making headlines on our local news page on civiccentertv.com. Our top story today comes from Jonathan Osting and Janelle D. James at Bridge, Michigan. Thursday was an historic day for gun reform hopefuls here in Michigan as Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed into law bills that make it a requirement in our state to safely store your firearms, as well as universal background checks for all gun purchasers, legislation that Governor Whitmer and fellow Democrats call common sense gun reforms. Governor Whitmer signed the bills at her alma mater, Michigan State University, inside of Spartan Stadium on the date exactly 2 months following a deadly mass shooting where 3 MSU students were killed and 5 were thrust into critical condition in the local Sparrow Hospital. In a heartfelt and emotional speech, the governor said, quote, "Gun violence is the scourge that is unique to our country, and that is why we are taking action. We don't have to live like this," and closed quote. Supporters are applauding the legislation, stating that the safe storage laws may have helped to prevent a 15-year-old shooter at Oxford High School from opening fire on his classmates back in November of 2021. However, critics of the new legislation claim that these laws would not have prevented shootings such as what occurred at MSU in February, as the 43-year-old shooter who was able to access these weapons was able to pass background checks and legally obtain the pistols that he used at both Berkey Hall and the MSU Union. So what will these bills exactly do? Safe storage laws signed yesterday by the governor will require gun owners, particularly those with minors in their home, to store their weapons either in a gun safe or another form of a safe, a locked case of some kind or other container, and those guns both be unloaded and with locks or cables blocking the trigger. Failure to do so may result in fines and jail time, which are scaled based on the severity of the outcome that results from particularly a minor getting control of that weapon, with up to 15 years in prison if a minor both obtains the weapon and uses that weapon to kill somebody, and 5 years if someone is simply just injured by that firearm that was in possession of a minor. Both of those are classified, however, as felonies per this law. The universal background check laws will require background checks where previous loopholes may have existed, including private firearm sales of rifles and other long guns, as well as pistols. Additionally, criminal penalties will be extended to those who circumvent these requirements, including existing misdemeanor and felony penalties that may be associated with selling these guns without doing the background checks that are now legally required, or will be legally required in the state of Michigan now that these laws have been signed into Michigan's letter of the law by Governor Gretchen Whitmer. That both occurred on both of those laws signed into Michigan law on Thursday by the governor. Also making headlines today from Clara Hendrickson at the Detroit Free Press. Despite the criticism, legislative Democrats are not done presenting gun reform bills in Lansing, passing a third bill that would include what are called red flag laws, allowing courts to mandate confiscation of weapons for those who may be considered a risk to either themselves and or others' lives. The House approved the bill on Thursday, and it is awaiting a Senate approval, which could come as early as next week. Last month, a similar bill was already passed in the Senate by Democrats and now will return to the Senate once again following this passed legislation by the House for a final bill passage. Then both chambers must agree on a final legislative package on this matter to send to Governor Whitmer's desk, where she will either sign it into law, much like she did with these other 2 pieces of legislation on Thursday, or will veto the bill and return it to the legislature. State Representative Julie Brixey, a Democrat from Okemos, a nearby suburb of Lansing that immediately neighbors East Lansing and whose district also includes East Lansing and MSU, said, quote, "We'll never know whether extreme risk protection orders would have prevented the MSU shooter, but we do know he was deeply troubled and there were warning signs," and closed quote. Some changes already discussed on these laws in the Senate have already gained support outside of the legislature from organizations including The Michigan Sheriff's Association, whose deputy director applauded some of these changes, as well as the Michigan Fraternal Order of Police. Among the changes include someone requiring to petition so-called red flag individuals to courts and to show proof of risk to either themselves or others that these weapons may pose in the near future in order to justify a court order for law enforcement to confiscate either temporarily or permanently the firearms that are in their possession. And of course, with support comes criticism, with some Republicans in our state legislature calling out the legislation as ineffective in combating gun violence and targeting the wrong perpetrators of these common mass crimes here in the U.S. Representative Jamie Green from Richmond was among the critics, stating, quote, "When we make guns the scapegoat for society's mental health crisis, it deflects our attention from real solutions," and closed quote. That full article, as well as supporting information and more background on some of these other potential laws that may come forward on the gun reform front, including this red flag law that's passed the House and is now going into the Senate for further deliberations before it may or may not be sent to Governor Whitmer's desk, can be found in this article on our website, civiccentertv.com. Just click on our local news page. Additionally, making headlines today from Anna Liz Nichols at the Detroit News, it's going to be an especially hot and sunny day today in our local area, which has made the conditions primed to be adverse for some with certain health issues, such as heat aversion and respiratory issues in particular, like asthma. The Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, otherwise known as EGLE, has issued an ozone action day due to the heat and the sun's increased risk of triggering potential respiratory conditions in some manners. Sunlight, along with common pollutants in the air like car exhaust and pollution from industry, can combine to create harmful ozone in our area of the atmosphere, which may lead to complications for those with certain respiratory diseases, such as asthma, as we mentioned just a moment ago. That according to the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level. High temperatures today are forecast to be around 80 degrees in southeast Michigan as well as in West Michigan, according to the National Weather Service, and that's where these Ozone Action Day advisories have been posted. Counties in our local area that are under this Ozone Action Advisory today are Wayne County, Washtenaw, St. Clair, Livingston, Monroe, as well as us here in Oakland County as well. Direct from this article, quote, "The National Weather Service urged Michigan residents to avoid activities that lead to ozone formation, including refueling your vehicles or using gasoline-powered lawn equipment or charcoal lighter fluid." Those are among some of the things that you can do to prevent this ozone action alert from becoming even more severe for those that are outside, because as was mentioned in this article, those certain pollutants can get into the atmosphere and have an adverse effect on those that may have asthma or may have other respiratory conditions, emphysema, and so on. That could potentially make it tough for people who are enjoying the sun outdoors on this what looks already like a beautiful Michigan Friday. Could potentially make it even more dangerous for them if they're going outside and those fumes are in the air and they're combining with all the elements that are already in our atmosphere and turning them into harmful ozone. It can make it really tough for some of these people to breathe, to be outside. Could make them more averse to the heat than they already may or may not be, and really just creates a dangerous environment for people in our local area. So if you are affected by something like emphysema or like asthma or other respiratory conditions, maybe you have COVID, maybe you've recently had COVID and your respiratory system's still recovering, it might not be the best idea for you to be outside for prolonged periods today, and especially if you're planning on taking today to go outside and do some work in the yard maybe while the sun is out and it's nice before we get the rain coming in late on Saturday and throughout Sunday. Maybe a better idea to stick to stuff that doesn't require some of those power tools, particularly those gas-powered power tools like a lawnmower, pushing or riding lawnmower. Maybe instead if you have a manual lawnmower that doesn't require any additional power, you use that, or you stick to maybe preparing your garden for the spring and the summer season, or working on trimming the hedges, or something that doesn't require gasoline or other fumes like exhaust to get into the air. And of course on the driving side, we understand you're going to work, you're going home, you're traveling for the weekend. That's all well and okay, but if you can limit your travel today, if you can limit the amount that you're driving, especially in southeastern Michigan or on the west side of the state where these ozone action advisories are in place, that would be preferable on today, because the conditions are ripe for ozone to form in our area of the atmosphere, which can be which can be potentially harmful to those with respiratory diseases. And ozone in our atmosphere is different than it is than what is the ozone layer that we hear about so much when we think particularly about climate change or global warming. That is a completely different thing than ozone than the gas ozone being in our area of the atmosphere and the air that we are breathing each and every day. So plenty of more detail is linked in this article from our friends at the Detroit News. Anna Liz Nichols did a great job compiling all this information and providing additional links to more information on ozone action days, as well as harmful pollutants that may lead to higher levels of ozone in our atmosphere from the EPA. All of that is linked in this article. You can find that article on our website on civiccentertv.com on our local news page. Finally, making headlines today on our local news page on civiccentertv.com from MLive's Justin P. Hicks. After over 3 years under COVID-19 health regulations, most of Michigan's hospitals have now dropped their mask requirements or have severely reduced those requirements in their buildings proper. More than a dozen of the largest health systems in the state of Michigan have reduced or revoked these policies, moving instead to optional orders with exceptions for when you're around people that are particularly at risk, such as those with who are immunocompromised. Those resting or relaxing their orders include Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, Sparrow Health System in Lansing, Michigan Medicine, and Ann Arbor as well. In addition, Corewell Health West, otherwise known previously as Spectrum, as well as Corewell Health East, formerly known as Beaumont, are also making their masking optional, except for in certain scenarios such as long-term care and skilled nursing facilities, as well as in transplant clinics and other at-risk situations throughout each of their health system locations. In addition, other health systems such as the Detroit Medical Center are going mask optional as of today, and Henry Ford Health is mask optional except, again, in those situations where you're around immunocompromised patients that are in their hospital buildings proper. So, of course, check with your local health system if you're going to the hospital to visit family or friends or other people, or for doctor's appointments and so on. Those mask requirements may still be in order where you are going to visit, where your hospital system is, where your doctor may be. So, as always, go to those websites, go to their websites for the health system, for your hospital individually, and check to make sure that you are, if you're still required to wear a mask where you're going to be in the hospital or overall in the hospital, that you're following along with those rules and being respectful to what they're asking of you as you're going into these systems. But for the most part, across our state, those mask requirements in our hospital systems have either gone away entirely or are moving into that next phase of relaxing themselves, with the masks being optional. Of course, you can always wear a mask anywhere you'd like if you so choose, and you want to protect yourself from to a certain extent from certain particles that may be in the air or may be transmitted by somebody else. That's always something that's available to you and is your choice, but it's no longer necessarily a requirement in many of these health systems, including some of the larger ones in our local area like Corewell Health East, Henry Ford Health System, and so on. So definitely encourage you to read this article from our friends at MLive. Justin P. Hicks put together all the details that you will need on this, including a list of many of our largest hospital systems in the state of Michigan and how their COVID-19 policies, particularly the masking policy, has been changed, either reduced, relaxed, or eliminated altogether. There's plenty of detail in this article. Just head over to our local news page on civiccentertv.com for all of that information on hospitals across Michigan relaxing or removing their mask requirements after over 3 years of having them in place due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, at the top of our local news page, we always have links to COVID-19 and other public health updates from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention at the federal level, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, as well as locally from the Oakland County Health Division, so you can learn more about what masking actually does, where masking is required in our local area, as well as resources on COVID-19 testing and COVID-19 vaccines and other information you may need to know. If you still need to gather some more information on COVID-19, those are excellent resources right there at the top of our local news page on civiccentertv.com. And of course, you can always read through each and every one of the articles that's made news across our local area and throughout the state of Michigan all throughout this current week. We'll keep those articles up until right before our live show on Monday morning, where we will reset that page as we do every single week, so that no matter if you're tuning in for one of our live shows on Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., or you're just visiting our website on Friday night or over the weekend to get the latest news from the past week after your busy work week has completed, it's always there on our local news page, civiccentertv.com. Just click through to each of those articles to read them in full and get more details and read additional articles that connect to those stories. And, of course, to support local journalists from throughout our local area, we would highly encourage you, if you have the means to do so, to subscribe to these publications and help them continue to do the great reporting they're doing each and every day here in Southeast Michigan and across the state. We have a great program ahead on today's edition of the Megacast. Coming up next, the latest in the markets and the economy with Dr. Michael Greiner from Oakland University in our weekly market and economy segment. Stay tuned. That's coming up next. This is the Megacast.
When the temperatures are chilly, being together warms the soul. Keep the winter fun going. Help protect yourself and those around you by keeping your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
1 in 4 Michigan homes has high levels of radon, a naturally occurring radioactive gas known to cause lung cancer. It doesn't matter where you live or what type of home you have. You won't even know it's there unless you test. So don't wait. Testing is cheap and easy. And if there's a problem, it's simple to fix. Visit michigan.gov/radon to learn more.
We took action. Will you?
Let's savor these moments, made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. Keep the dining out going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
The West Bloomfield Youth Assistants will be recognizing local youth for their volunteer service, personal growth, and leadership. Join us as schools, hospitals, and religious organizations nominate the up-and-comers in your community. Show your pride for our future. The Youth Recognition Awards, May 10th at 6 p.m. at the West Bloomfield Middle School. This community update from Civic Center TV and 89.3 Lakes FM.
Hello, nose. My nose knows is when somebody uses the bathroom. Mom, Pauline didn't flush. Ooh, I smell cookies.
I smell an A+.
How could my nose be running when it stays on my face?
Our noses know if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan and Oakland County. I'm Tyler Kieft. As always, you can keep up to date with our program and find us on demand on civiccentertv.com/Megacast, where you'll also find access to even more great community programming in your hometown from stations all throughout Oakland County and Michigan-wide programming for free on your smartphones, on your smart TVs, and on the web from our co-flagship, My Michigan TV. All of that is placed on our website, civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Each and every day you can find that information and keep up to date with us with our segments and full episodes usually posted about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on our show days. Joining us now on the program, as he does each and every week, to talk about the latest in our economy and in the markets, is Dr. Michael Greiner from Oakland University, who is an assistant professor of management in their School of Business Administration. Michael, thanks for being with us.
Great to be here on this beautiful Friday.
Yes, another beautiful Friday here in Michigan, and when we're in Michigan, we're typically focusing on the economic side, on the auto industry, which always has such a huge influence here in Michigan, and particularly where we're basing our show in the Detroit area. But U.S. car makers having some issues overseas. We know that a lot of that overseas competition has caused them some issues domestically over the years on the sales side, but in terms of the sales and manufacturing side overseas, we're seeing now U.S. car makers having some issues, particularly in China. What's going on in that regard?
Yeah, that's kind of frustrating and bad news because really the decline has been pretty significant. I mean, just 2 years ago, we saw the U.S. automakers having as much as 61% of the market share in China. And the most recent figures have them down to about 41%. So that's a decline of about 20 points. So they expect that'll bounce back a little bit as some inventory is sold off. But nevertheless, one thing is clear. The share that the U.S. automakers are having in China is going down. Now, that could be for a couple of reasons. Number one, of course, there's been the issue with China essentially subsidizing its domestic industries, and not so much by putting money directly in, but really not by protecting intellectual property. And this has been a big issue for companies operating in China, where essentially they've found that Chinese law, to the extent that there really is such a thing as Chinese law, doesn't protect intellectual property the way we do in the United States or Europe or most of the rest of the developed world. So in other words, you've got Chinese companies essentially stealing technology from the American companies and then applying it to their own processes that they then use to compete against us. And in fact, the Chinese government has made it particularly difficult to operate in China because of the fact that they require any company operating there to essentially engage in a joint venture. So what you have to do is you have to have a Chinese partner who you're working with in China to be able to sell products there. Well, what does that do? That opens the door then for this Chinese partner to essentially be learning from you and taking that information then that they ultimately use to compete against you. And so we're seeing a lot of that. The other big thing that we're seeing, of course, in China is that in China, actually, electric vehicles have a much higher presence than they do in the United States. And the fact is, unfortunately, the United States still is a little bit behind the curve in terms of being able to compete on a global scale when it comes to electric vehicles. Right now, there are a couple of Chinese automakers that focus on electric vehicles. And of course, with the exception of Tesla, which is an American company, although they have a strong Chinese presence, these companies tend to have lower prices. They tend to have more offerings, and in some cases, even higher technology offerings. So unfortunately, it appears that the Chinese economy is kind of squeezing the American manufacturers out using these two tools. And it's really kind of frustrating, I think, for the automakers. They were very happy to see that there was a bounce up back of auto sales after the decline that we had as a result of COVID. But really, again, when you're looking at the share of the auto market in China, it's really something that should be of great concern to anybody who's concerned about the auto industry, as we are here in Michigan.
Yeah, so let's elaborate further on that, because it's particularly affecting these automakers in China. It's affecting on the manufacturing side and certainly on the sales side. But how does that then bounce back to us here in the U.S. and particularly our auto market here? Because if they're not getting the money they're usually getting out of China, that's certainly going to come back and affect us here in the U.S.
Oh, it definitely does. I mean, it impacts the viability of the American auto manufacturers. I mean, GM in particular has made a huge investment in China. And for a while there, they were actually one of the largest selling automakers there. In fact, it's argued by a lot of people that the whole reason that GM kept Buick, the Buick brand, because you may recall when they declared bankruptcy a few years back during the 2008-2009 recession, they ended up getting rid of a whole bunch of brands, including one that I used to own, actually, Pontiac. But they kept Buick, which a lot of people thought, well, that's interesting. That's kind of odd. And the reason is, though, that Buick was a very, very popular brand in China. And it still is. And so GM has a large presence there, and they rely upon the revenues then that they're receiving from China to be able to essentially boost their bottom line company-wide, which then enables them to do whatever they're doing. What's more is, I think also, and particularly when you look at GM and when you look at Ford, they're making huge investments right now in transitioning from the internal combustion engines over to the electric engines. And as a result of that, they're having to invest a lot of money into research and development and developing new factories and developing new supply chains, that type of thing. And the fact that they're receiving less money than from China makes it harder for them to create those investments that will ultimately enable them to engage in that shift. So it's definitely something that's a big concern, I think, that all automakers are concerned about. And finally, we have to remember that a good portion of the even if the vehicles are assembled in China, a good portion of the parts then would be manufactured here, or again manufactured by American companies with overseas subsidiaries or overseas operations. And as a result of that, again, that flows down the whole supply chain, as we see that where less money coming in means just less money available for these companies to compete on a global scale.
We're joined on the program today, as we are each and every Friday, for a discussion on the latest in the markets and the economy with Michael Greiner from Oakland University's School of Business Administration. On today's edition of the Megacast, more information on programs through Oakland University, including in their School of Business Administration, can be found on oakland.edu. That's oakland.edu for more information. And now moving on, one of the great rivalries of our modern day, the Federal Reserve versus inflation, continues on. And once again, it seems like inflation may be cooling down, but it's only a matter of time before that heats right back up. So where is that standing? Certainly affecting us here in Oakland County and around the U.S.
Yeah, well, we just got some good news last week, which showed that inflation did appear to be going down a little bit. Now, that was particularly the consumer price index, which is what was announced, had gone down to 5%, which is the lowest rate we've seen in quite some time. And as a result of that, there was some celebration among people that, well, maybe it shows that the efforts by the Federal Reserve are starting to take effect. And as we talked about previously, too, there's also the effect that we're seeing by less bank lending as a result of the crisis that we're seeing in the banking industry, particularly in those mid-sized banks. But when you dig a little bit deeper in the numbers, it still has some concerns. I mean, number one, it's not dropping as quickly as we might like to see. I mean, we definitely want to see inflation closer to the 2% level, and having it at 5% is still something that's worrying. But what's more is that there are different ways to measure inflation. Inflation is basically where you take a basket of goods. The Consumer Price Index is a basket of goods and services where they look at what's the average household in the United States spending their money on. And then they take this basket of goods and ask, well, how much have the prices of this basket of goods gone up over the past year relative to what they were last year? And 5% obviously is a pretty big increase. It's a lot lower than we saw last summer when we were seeing as much as 9% increase, but still, it's higher than we'd like to see. Than we'd like to see. So the fact that it has gone down is something that's encouraging, but it doesn't get far enough. But a big part of what you see in that basket of goods are, of course, energy and food. And those two things actually have moderated quite a bit over the last couple months. Energy, even with the price increase that OPEC Plus passed recently, which we talked about in a prior show, the energy prices are way down compared to what they were shortly after the invasion of Ukraine first started. And food prices similarly have moderated really since the same time period, because, of course, large suppliers of grain and certain other foodstuffs are both Ukraine and Russia on the global economy. So as a result of that, the fact that those prices are going down affects then the overall basket of goods. But economists are aware of the fact that those two sets of goods tend to be pretty volatile. They'll go up, they'll go down. And so what we'll do is we'll frequently strip them out and look at what we call core inflation, which tends to be more the kinds of things that have longer term trends where you might not see big jumps up or down from one month to the next, and you can start to kind of look at trends over the long term. And there, unfortunately, the news was not as good, where it actually went up a little bit, I believe from 5.3% to 5.4%. And the biggest offenders there are transportation, particularly airline tickets, which had a big increase, and housing, shelter is being particularly difficult to kind of get the cost down on. Part of that has to do with the fact that there's a big shortage of housing in the United States. In fact, I saw that there are various estimates, anywhere from, say, about 7 million gap between demand and what's available, down to anywhere to 1.5 million. So there's a big question as to exactly how much there is. But the one thing everybody agrees on is that there's a housing shortage in the United States. And what that's doing is pushing up housing prices. And even though they have moderated a little bit, they're still higher than we'd like to see. And that's creating upward pressure then on inflation, which makes it tougher for the Fed to deal with it. So I would not be surprised if hate to say it, we'll see in the next meeting that the Fed has, which is going to be the first week of May, that we're going to see another rate increase, probably just a quarter percentage point, but a rate increase nonetheless.
Yeah, we see these dips up and down. That's where that continued concern seems to be from the Federal Reserve. What should they be doing with the interest rates to combat that? It may work at one point in time to raise the interest rate to cool down the economy, and you'll see the inflation rate then reduce, but then you pull those effects back, you pull that interest rate hike back the next month over, next few weeks over, and it goes right back. So the continued battle moves forward. And Michael, on a more local level here in the state of Michigan, really interesting story over the past week from MLive. It was posted on Monday. Really interesting article on mlive.com that came from Matthew Miller, exploring the relationship between big box stores and local communities. In many cases, it's directing a lot of commerce to those local areas. It's filling a number of gaps in terms of shops that are available, grocery stores in particular in some of these places. And in spots like Houghton, way up in the Upper Peninsula, they're having some issues on the tax side, in particular with these big box stores. Where are these issues coming up from, and really what is that battle that's now happening between the Goliaths like Walmart and local communities like Houghton?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think a very important story, and I'm glad you're bringing this up. I'm particularly sensitive to this, actually, having worked in municipal government for many years before I started practicing law and then went into academia. But essentially, you have to remember that the biggest source of income for most local communities is property taxes. And the way that that local communities decide what the property taxes are going to do is that there are certain rules that the local assessor will apply to property to determine, how much is this property worth, so that we're able to tax it appropriately. Because you have to remember, with real estate, so much of the time you'll go years between one sale and another. And obviously the economy varies quite a bit between those years. So you have these assessors then applying these rules to try to determine, well, if the property were sold today, how much would they get for it? And that then becomes the basis for the for property taxes. Now, since Proposal A passed back in the, I think it was the 1980s or 1990s, Michigan municipalities have really been struggling because the amount that they're able to tax residential property has been capped. So it can't go up at the same price then that property values are going up. And that's an important protection then for people, so they aren't losing their homes as a result of tax foreclosure. That cap, though, generally does not apply to businesses. And so as a result, local municipalities have becoming more and more reliant upon the property taxes that they're getting from businesses to be able to fund their operations. Now, this kind of is a challenge then for local municipalities, because at the same time as they've been working to try to make sure that they have enough revenues to provide the services that they offer, which include things like road repairs, garbage pickup, fire, police, really the things that so many of us think that government provides. They also want to attract business into the community. And there's developed this competition between local communities to see who is going to get the economic development. And so a lot of the time what they'll do is that they'll try to offer different tax incentives to try to get businesses to invest in their communities. And they'll offer them certain benefits like, say, we will build a new road here if you end up investing in this area. And I can tell you for a fact that when I worked for the city of Warren, we engaged in this quite aggressively, actually, giving a lot of tax breaks to GM to encourage them to invest in the tech center here, for example. Well, one of the biggest areas that you've seen investments in, of course, have been these big box stores. You're talking Walmart, you're talking Best Buy, you're talking Meijer, stores like this. And you can see where these stores will pull from a whole area. Now, in a city like Warren, for example, where I live, you'll see a number of big box stores. But say more a rural area, like say in Houghton or even in more rural Oakland County, you'll see one big box store serving a bunch of different communities. So there ends up being this competition between the different communities to see if they will be able to get it. Now, what we've seen, though, is that once this taxable value has been established, and the assessors then start to apply the rules as to how they're going to increase the taxes year over year, then you've seen the different companies that operate these big box stores actually appealing those assessments to what's called the Michigan Tax Tribunal. And what they've been able to do is convince the Michigan Tax Tribunal that that the property tax shouldn't be assessed based upon the ongoing value of the business. So as if it were Walmart being sold to somebody else, but instead that it would be sold based upon what would be the value of this building if it were empty, if there were nobody in here. And what the businesses have argued is that that's what would be the property sale if the business were to be if the building were to be sold to some other operator, that it would be sold as an empty building, not as an ongoing business. And as a result, the Michigan Tax Tribunal has sided with the businesses on that. Now, you can imagine that the value of an empty store is a lot lower than the value of an ongoing business, say a Walmart or a Best Buy or a Meijer, for example. And as a result of that, these businesses are paying much, much lower property taxes than they would if it were assessed as an ongoing business. And this has been a real frustration for the local municipalities who have seen the income from these properties go down. Well, with Houghton, which you mentioned, we just have now a case that's become particularly interesting because of the fact that in an added twist, Houghton had actually negotiated with Walmart what would be the taxable value of this business essentially, in exchange for the municipality making certain concessions to the business. So they kind of made a deal. This will be the value of the business that we tax, and in exchange, the city will do certain things for Walmart. Well, Walmart then, most recently, went and appealed that based upon this empty store theory, saying that, well, wait a minute, we shouldn't have to pay this high taxes. And again, that is an argument that the Michigan Tax Tribunal in the past has looked upon favorably. The difference here, though, is that Walmart agreed to this with the city of Houghton in exchange for certain concessions that the city of Houghton was making. And so as a result, what the city of Houghton is doing is saying, wait a minute, this isn't just a tax issue. This is a contract issue where we have an agreement here with Walmart. They said they would pay this amount in property taxes, and now they're trying to go back on that deal. So in addition to the Michigan Tax Tribunal appeal, there's also a lawsuit here. And I think that this is something that's going to be watched very, very closely by municipalities because, again, there's this constant tension that they have between what are we going to do to try to encourage economic development in our community versus what do we need to do to make sure that we have the revenues that we need to be able to provide the services that our community needs.
We're joined by Michael Greiner from Oakland University on today's edition of the Megacast. That article from MLive is on their website. The title of that article, The Dark Store Theory, has cost Michigan cities millions, and it's facing new challenges. Really interesting story. I would encourage you to read that. And also, just finally today, Michael, last week we talked about some labor issues in particular that are happening in higher education, particularly at four-year universities like U of M in Ann Arbor. But some good news actually coming this week on the enrollment side from our local community college here in Oakland County at OCC, seeing enrollment remaining mostly steady, or if it's falling at a significantly lower rate than it is in most places across the nation. So tell us about that, and just why enrollment has seen such a dip across community colleges despite many incentives in states to attend at lower cost, and what OCC is doing differently. It's keeping those people here.
Yeah, this is a great news story, actually, and I think it's something that all of us in Metro Detroit area should feel really good about. Because of the fact that really OCC has done a lot of the right things. I mean, as we talked about last time, the problem that higher education overall is dealing with is the fact that we've hit a demographic cliff, where there just aren't as many young people graduating from high school as there were in prior years. And that has to do with the fact that we went through a period where there were fewer births than there had been in the past. I mean, obviously, you had the baby boom. They went through school. Then there was Generation X, my generation, and then subsequent generations. And since then, though, you've started to see fewer and fewer young people coming through the system. The result of that then kind of moves down goes down the hill and ends up ultimately hitting higher education, where now there are literally fewer freshmen starting in higher education institutions across the country than there were just a few years ago, and that has resulted in some big changes at a lot of institutions. For example, I remember reading at CMU, a school I once taught at, actually, that that they actually had to close down a dorm. So they're dealing with major issues and big declines in enrollment there. Now, some schools have not been affected by this so much. Obviously, Michigan State, U of M aren't affected because people come from all over the country and all over the world for those schools. Similarly, some more commuter schools where people are willing to stay locally and end up offering good deals to them as a result of that. Like, say, U of M Flint or my institution, Oakland University, have done relatively well. But again, some of these kind of mid-level state schools have really struggled. Well, another group that has struggled, of course, are the community colleges, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you've got these larger schools now that are kind of trying to reach down into the pool that typically went to community college and try to encourage them to go directly to being freshmen at the large universities and offering different incentives for that to try to bulk up the number of students that they've got. Well, what smart community colleges have done, and Oakland University is really the great example of this, is that they've been competitive. Is that they've said, we're not just going to roll over and we're not going to allow these schools to come in and essentially take the students away from us. We're going to realize that we're in this competitive environment and we need to make sure that students here are getting a good opportunity and that they're doing well. And so as a result of that, really since COVID hit, they've completely transformed the delivery of their classes now, where I think about 50% of them are online. They've also streamlined their admissions process. They've streamlined their financial aid process. So they've done a great job of making it easier for people to go to community college. What's more is they've really increased the support for students. I mean, one of the big issues that you see in community colleges across the country is the fact that so many students at this level will start but never finish. I think that it's as high as 60% of the students will start one year and not even enroll in the second year. And so that's a big problem at these schools. And you can understand why. I mean, most people who go to community college, they're people who have a lot going on in their lives. They have a lot of pressures. It's hard to go back to school. And so you really kind of need to meet people where they are and kind of help them through this process. Well, OCC has worked really hard at that. So as a result of that, they have a continuation rate, essentially the rate of people continuing on through school and finishing up. That's quite a bit higher than 50%. And that's really doesn't sound like a lot, but actually is quite high compared to most community colleges. And finally, what they've done is that they've kept their costs low. Their cost is actually lower than the median cost that you see for community colleges across the state. So that combination of things shows that they've really taken the challenge seriously of this competitive environment that we're in, because of the fact that essentially you've got different schools competing for a smaller pool of students. And as a result of that, although they have seen a little bit of a drop, I think it's been a drop of about 12%, that's nothing compared to the drop that you see nationwide of about 37% to community colleges. So I think it's a real success story for OCC and something that all of us in Metro Detroit and here in Oakland County can really feel good about.
You can find more information from Oakland University about their programs by visiting oakland.edu. And of course, this article that we're referencing about OCC's recent success is on the homepage of the Oakland Press at theoaklandpress.com. Really great article, and we are working actively here and have been in discussions with OCC to get their Chancellor, Peter M. Provenzano Jr., or another member of their team on our show very soon. We're expecting to have them on sometime in the next week or so to talk even more about this. Michael, finally, the EPA, let's go back to a talk on the automotive industry earlier on, particularly electric vehicles you touched on. The EPA is implementing a new rule that's going to be aimed at accelerating how quickly electric vehicles become the predominant motor vehicle on our roads here in the U.S. What are they doing to speed that up, so to speak, and move away from internal combustion engines?
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, this is a big story. And you know, it's kind of one of those things, fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon how you view it, we still are the Motor City, you know, and we still do rely upon the big automakers to provide most of our jobs and most of our economic support here. And when the auto industry does badly, you know, our economy here does badly. Interestingly enough, the EPA administrator had actually considered coming to Detroit to make this announcement. But when it became clear that some of the automakers and especially some of the unions weren't so excited about it, the EPA administrator changed his plans and ended up making the announcement in Washington. Well, the reason why there are these concerns about it is because of the fact you have to remember there are fewer moving parts in a electric vehicle than there is an internal combustion engine. As a result of that, there's less need for workers. What's more is it's resulting in an entire transformation of the supply chain and the manufacturing process for automobiles. And what you're seeing with some of these automakers is rather than investing here in Detroit and Ohio and the Midwest, where they've traditionally been located, you're seeing some of these automakers locating them in the South. And in fact, I just read that the two states right now that are enjoying the largest investments related to electric vehicles are one, Michigan, which of course is good news, but the other is Tennessee, which just shows you the challenge that the Midwestern states are dealing with in competing to get this investment for the electric vehicles. Well, as of a couple of years ago, there had been an agreement essentially between the automakers and the administration that by 2030, which we have to remember is only 6 years away now, that by 2030, a good half of the vehicles sold in the United States would be electric. Well, now what's happening is the EPA is proposing a new rule that would actually increase that amount up to about 54% of vehicles, which again is an increase of 4%, but by, I believe, 2027, so even sooner. And that's going to create great pressure on the automakers to be able to comply with that. And, you know, it could result in layoffs among them. And basically the way they're doing this, though, is that they're doing it through a process that's similar to some people who are involved in auto industry may remember the CAFE standards. What CAFE stands for is Corporate Average Fuel Economy. And basically, under the Clean Air Act, what the EPA was able to do is say, not specifically, oh, you should sell this percentage of vehicles being electric, but they could say that for your entire fleet of vehicles that you sell, that they need to have, on average, a certain fuel economy, in the case of corporate average fuel economy, or they need to have be on average zero emitting of carbon. Okay, and so the kind of when you do the mathematics there, you realize that this new proposal is going to require 54% of the vehicles to be all electric by the time we get to 2027, and I believe as much as 2/3 by the time we get to 2032. So you're talking big increases in electrification, and it's hard to imagine how we can get there so quickly. But, you know, personally, you'll have to count me as a little bit of an optimist here, and I'm always an early adopter, and I'm kind of optimistic about these things. But I've just seen where these things seem impossible. But I have a lot of faith in the American in American business, and particularly in the American automakers, to be able to engage in this transition. I mean, they've been very serious, particularly Ford and GM have been very serious about investing in electric vehicles now for some time. They've already said that they intend to essentially have fleets that are entirely electric by the time I believe we get to 2035. So they're well on their way to accomplishing those goals. And the question is, are we going to be able to get consumers to buy them? Well, in my view, part of what we have going on here is one of those chicken and egg syndromes. And that's the cycle that I think the administration is trying to break here with this rule, which is that people say, you know, oh, I don't want to buy an electric vehicle until it becomes more affordable and until there are more charging stations. While at the same time, the charging stations say, well, we don't want to build more charging stations until there are more people driving these electric vehicles. And the automakers say, oh, we don't want to build more of these vehicles until more people want them. And we can't lower the price until we're building more of them, because then we get the economies of scale. So you can see where all these things kind of rely on each other, and you need someone to step in and kind of break that cycle. And I think that's what the administration is trying to do here. Say, look, you have to make this percentage of vehicles be electric. And in so doing, it's essentially going to force the hand of the automakers to start producing vehicles at a lower cost. I mean, we saw this, for example, with the corporate average fuel economy, where you saw the price of some of the smaller vehicles, the more fuel-efficient vehicles, actually being sold at a loss. to the automaker because of the fact that they needed to have that average come down so that they were able to sell some of their more profitable vehicles. And I would not be surprised if we see the same thing happening, where you'll see the automakers become much more aggressive in their pricing for the electric vehicles to try to achieve this average of sales of electric vehicles relative to the internal combustion engine vehicles, and as a result of that, you'll see the prices really come down on the vehicles, and then what that'll do is encourage people to buy them, and then that'll encourage more charging stations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you saw where the administration has been very serious about this issue for some time now. For example, they passed the Inflation Reduction Act a couple of years ago, and that, despite its name, is really a climate bill. Very focused on trying to reduce the dependence on oil and fossil fuels that we have in the United States. So there are a lot of incentives there to kind of encourage people to purchase electric vehicles and to essentially create investments in things like charging stations and in manufacturing processes to make the different kinds of batteries. And what's more is also investments in research. Because you have to remember, everybody says, we won't be able to produce enough batteries for this because of the fact that we just don't have enough lithium. Lithium's hard to get. But you have to remember, just a few years ago, lithium batteries didn't exist. Lithium batteries were the great new invention because they were so efficient. Well, I was just reading in another article where they were talking about how sodium is the next big thing in terms of batteries, and that actually both China and the United States are making big strides toward developing a sodium battery, which obviously would be much more easily accessible in terms of the raw materials, because what's sodium but salt? So as a result of that, I think that this is a great opportunity that we're seeing. It's just, whenever you see change happen, it's a scary thing. And unfortunately, I do think that it's likely to produce potentially layoffs throughout the auto industry. But the one thing that is good is we're seeing a big move by the state to try to encourage these investments here in Michigan. And also given the big automakers, that there is kind of this infrastructure here that's going to encourage more of it. So hopefully we'll actually be the beneficiaries of this rather than the big losers.
Yeah, it's really, for the automakers, it's that balance of when do we, pun intended, hit the gas on moving from internal combustion to focusing mostly on electric vehicles. It's going to depend on government incentives, where the market for automobiles moves going forward, the ease of making those batteries, whether it is lithium or sodium or some other innovation that comes along, and then other factors in the world of electronics such as semiconductors certainly will also play a role going forward too. Michael, thank you as always for joining us.
It's great to be here. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the beautiful weather.
You as well. Michael Greiner joins us every Friday for a discussion on the economy and the markets in our weekly segment partnering with Oakland University. You can learn more about programs in the School of Business Administration and across the university at Oakland by visiting oakland.edu. That is going to do it for this week's editions of the Megacast. As always, you can find us online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on civiccentertv.com/Megacast. If you can't join us Monday through Friday live from 10 a.m. to 11 for our entire show, or even for part of the show, you can find us on demand. Most of our episodes and daily content is posted by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or at least very early in the afternoon on the days of our show. And of course, we replay all throughout our network throughout the days of the weekday as well as on the weekends as well. And you can learn more about the entirety of our network, including original programming in the other 23 hours of the day that we're not live, Monday through Friday during the week, throughout our network by visiting our Megacast page on civiccentertv.com. That includes original programming about your community in northern Oakland County from Orion Neighborhood Television, as well as in the Lakes area from the Media Network of Waterford, from us here at Civic Center TV, and in the Birmingham-Bloomfield area, Birmingham Area Municipal Access on the radio side. Great student radio Monday through Friday from about 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the afternoon and the evening from students at Bloomfield Hills High School at 88.1 The Biff, and statewide programming, educational programming, fun programming, original shows from creators right here in Michigan. All About Michigan is available for free on your smartphone, on your smart TVs, and on the web from our co-flagship, My Michigan TV. You can find all of that, including a link to mymytv.com, by visiting our website at civiccentertv.com/megacast. In addition, highly encourage you to always be taking a look at our local news page throughout the week and over the weekend to get the latest on the top stories here in Oakland County and around the state of Michigan from excellent journalists doing amazing work, telling the stories of our local communities and talking about the issues impacting us all across the Great Lakes state each and every day. CivicCenterTV.com, click on our local news page, and then you can click through to each and every one of these articles. And as well, we always encourage you, if you have the means to do so, to subscribe to these publications and support journalism in your local area and throughout the state of Michigan. Big thank you, as always, to Michael Greiner for being with us on our show today, as he is each and every Friday, and for all of our guests throughout the week, as well as our dedicated crew, Jared Clark at the studio of My Michigan TV, getting us on the air statewide. And our director, as always, is Calvin Brown at Master Control here at Green Media Center in West Bloomfield, our director today and every day throughout this week. Until next time, take care of each other, have a great weekend, and we'll see you very soon.